Hello everyone, this is Mike and welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to be going over the second method of how to create a GUI-based PowerShell script using, again, free tools. So if you missed it, the last video that I recorded went through the first method utilizing the Windows Forms assembly and Visual Studio Community Edition, and a module, a PowerShell module that you could download from GitHub for free. So the second method here still relies on Visual Studio Community Edition if you want to keep it free. If you have a paid for version of Visual Studio, that will work fine as well. But let's say we're just doing something for free and utilizes a bit of code that I'll make available in the link in the description if you want to download it, and using the WPF, the Windows Presentation Foundation, which is another way of creating graphical tools in a Windows environment. All right, so that's going to be what we're going to be focusing on here. All right, so let's switch over to our lab environment. And the code that I was mentioning here is this code that I've put together. The file name is GUI XAML starter template. And the technique that we're using here, using the Windows Presentation Foundation, does use XAML as the language here for putting together the form elements. Now, it is close to the Windows Forms assemblies that we used in the previous video here, but it's not exact. So for instance, like some of the properties might be a little different. So like a checkbox in the Windows Forms assemblies, the property is checked. It's literally the word checked. And in Windows Presentation Foundation, a checkbox, the property, if it's checked or not, is a property called isChecked, ISCHECKED. So isChecked. So Windows Forms uses checked, WPF uses isChecked. So there is going to be kind of a little difference there. And also when I get into making a multi-line text box, that also is a little different as well. All right. So to start off here, we're going to make the same simple tool that we made in the previous video. So this isn't really about the tool itself. It's just about how to create a GUI around a PowerShell script. Okay, so again, we're keeping it rather simple here. So again, in future videos, I'll get into more complex GUI tool design. But just to keep it simple to start off with, we're going to basically redo the same tool that we did in the last video, right? So I'm going to crank up Visual Studio here and create a project. Now the project I'm looking to create this time is not going to be Windows Forms. If you put into the search box up here, WPF for Windows Presentation Foundation, you should be the first listing here, WPF application, using C Windows Desktop. Right, so pick that one. Call it whatever you want. I'll just go with WPF App 1. I literally don't need anything in here, so I'm not really thinking of it too much long term here as a project I'm going to save. And then we'll go ahead and create. Okay, so that should launch Visual Studio and then give me the WPF graphical tools here so I could go ahead and make a form. So the XAML code that you'll need is actually right in the bottom here of the form. Okay, so will eventually be copying and pasting that out of there. Okay, so once my VM here catches up, we'll get that going here. All right, so same kind of layout as before, where you have the form itself here. Oops, hold on a sec. Wait for this to catch up. So I have my form in the center window. You can highlight it and see different properties appear on the right. We don't really need Solutions Explorer up here. And the toolbox we have over here. All right. Okay, so first of all, the main window. So one of the things to keep in mind with WPF, and again, I'm not the master designer here of WPF. I'm basically using it to create a PowerShell GUI. I don't consider myself an expert in it whatsoever. It's just something handy to draw out a form to speed up my design in making a PowerShell graphical script. Right? So with WPF, you start off with a window. Right that there. You start off with a window, and on that window you have a grid. So if you notice here, like if I just click in the center of the window, I'm actually clicking on the grid, which is not typically something I want to mess with, at least in my case here. So if you kind of move the mouse up, you can kind of notice, like, see that where there's like an outer outline that kind of highlights there, and you can click that, and that will then highlight the actual window. Um, and then over on the right here, you could see some properties. So right now, my window has no name. So maybe I'll call it, I don't know, WPF Form 1, something like that. If I want to give it uh, some title, like notice right now it says main window. Maybe I want to change it to something else, so maybe WPF Form 1, change it to something like that. All right. So now that kind of shows that name there. I know it's a little small on text, but that's what the title now is. And then we can go ahead and put in our elements that we wanted. So for instance, I wanted, let's see, I'm going to need a label. So we can go ahead, put a label in there. And for the label, we can give it a name. Maybe label, oh, if I don't typo that. Label 1, enter, and that presents our label. Maybe we'll make that, drag that out there. And yeah, text on that's a little small. So maybe, let's see, come over here. We could see some of the common properties here. So for instance, the font, maybe we'll take and increase the font on that some. Um, Again, there was our name of it and so on. So with some elements, when you click on them, there could be a little property box up here if you wanted to click the right arrow on that. And you could also go look at the property box that's on the right side over here. Right? So one thing to keep in mind, as you drag things in here, they do not get a name automatically. Windows Forms does assign names automatically, WPF does not. Right, but you can see it now appeared down here. So if you look where my mouse is down here, you can see label name equals label 1 was added in. Right? So we're going to need a couple text boxes here. So let's drag one text box in. And maybe we'll call it text box 1. Keep it original here. I do not want any text in it. So I'm going to blank that out for the text part. And the font, probably want to make the font a little bigger there so we could see what's going on. So that's cool. So we've got that. Probably arrange that. Come on. Arrange that underneath the label. Oh man, my computer's performing horribly right now. Okay, so let's get that situated in there. And we'll go with that. Okay, so let's continue with our next element here. We're going to put a button in. So we'll grab button over here, drag that over to this side, give it a name. Button 1 works fine for me. What do I want for text inside of it? Maybe I'll just say go. And maybe we'll make the font a little bigger there. Okay, cool. And probably might be nice to resize the button a little bit there. All right, so we now have a button. Oh, I should have probably adjusted label there. We ultimately did want a computer name out of this, right? Let's maybe drag this over here a little bit. All right. And then lastly, we wanted another text box. So we'll come put that in. This will be text box 2. I don't want any text in it, so I'll clear that out. Then the font size, maybe we'll do 16. And maybe I'll change the font in this. I like Lucida Console. That's what PowerShell uses as like a good width proportional font. So each character is the same width, makes output a lot nicer. So go ahead, go with that. And we need to size this text box a little bit here. Need some output. Let's maybe bring that down a little bit. Maybe not quite that far. So maybe something like that. All right. I know it looks completely horrible, but again, we're just, we can customize this as we want, but trying to keep this a little short here, so go with that. All right, so now a couple things I might need. All right, so this output right here, this output box could have multiple lines. So in order to do that, if you do have a text box selected here, there's a couple things you might want to have a look at. So number one would be underneath layout. We might want the vertical scroll bar. All right. So if you kind of expand, so if you notice here, like I expand, let me collapse all these here. If I expand layout, notice there's a down arrow showing more. Okay, so there is other stuff underneath there. And then I can get to that and you can see vertical scroll bar. So I can change that to visible or auto or something like that. So I'll go ahead and do that. And then we'll collapse layout, we'll expand text, and again notice there's a down arrow there to show more properties. We can click the checkbox for accept returns, and the second thing is text wrapping. So that should be set to wrap by default, but just to verify that it is. And so those three settings, the vertical scroll bar visibility, text wrapping, and accepts returns, is basically the same as making a multi-line text box using Windows Forms. So again, Windows Presentation Foundation, WPF, the elements are not exact, okay? So they're not kind of a one-to-one match there. But that's what we'll need, right? And then we basically have our elements here. So if you look down at the bottom, the XAML code is authored for us here. So what I could do is just put my cursor right down, somewhere down here, click somewhere, okay, and then do a Control A to highlight all of that. And if you want to right click, there is a copy, or do Control C. And then what I'm going to do is come into this template that I had shown at the beginning of the video. And the XAML code goes right here. So if you look at line 5, so you're going to paste it in this element here is creating what's called a here string. So a here string takes multiple lines of text and takes the formatting to it, doesn't alter it at all, and makes it one string object. All right, now normally when you have multiple lines of code pasted in, each line becomes a separate string object in a lot of cases with PowerShell. So we don't want that. We want this to be seen as one string. And so this is a technique for doing that. It's called a here string. You also use the same technique when you're adding in cascading style sheets into a PowerShell script that's making an HTML report. The same technique is used. All right, so I'm just going to put my cursor on line 5, Control V or right click and paste, whatever you want to do, and then the XAML code gets added in. If you get an extra blank line at the bottom there, see how on line 21 that's blank, I'll just get rid of that. So that way we have, here's our input, that's the start of our here string, all of the XAML code inside of that, and then the closing of the here string down there. All right. So that's kind of the first part here. So we've now added in the graphical elements for WPF to use. Right? Now, next down here is a bunch of code that formats that XAML, turns it basically into variables. So kind of goes through, does a bit of replacing of some of the code in there, loads it ultimately as XML, and creates variables for each of the elements in the XML document that's being created here. So if you notice, there's XAML reader, XML node reader as .NET objects that are being called here. Right? So that will go ahead and make the form. So at this point, it's probably advisable to save. Let's do a file. We'll do save as because I don't want to overwrite my template here. And we'll just call this, so my demo folder, I'll just call this GUI2, right? Just something, right? So then let's go into a separate PowerShell session. I should see that GUI2 document right there, and we'll go ahead and just run that. And that puts up our form. Now our form is not doing anything yet, okay, but you can see the form part is at least working. Right? So the XAML pasted in fine. The extra code we had in was able to turn it into these graphical elements, and we are rocking and rolling here. Okay, so now we want to add the functionality in to make this thing actually work. Right? So in the template, and again, you're welcome to modify this. I mean, this is kind of my own template that I created here. I have a section for code to run before the button gets clicked, so the button click event. Um, no one, no one laugh at me. It's just what I've called it. I couldn't think of anything else better. And code to run when button is clicked. Right. So in this case, there's nothing that needs to happen before the button gets clicked. So there's no drop-down forms I need to populate. There's nothing else that needs to be calculated. So this part here is just going to remain empty, right? But I do need something to happen when the button is clicked, right? So, so that we're going to, just like last time, we're going to create a function. I'm going to call the function ping, because that's really what it's going to be doing. It's going to go contact a computer name. And then the code inside of it is what I want to have happen. So the first thing we'll do is we'll maybe save to output, which is a variable that doesn't exist yet. I'm defining it now. We'll do a test connection computer name. So the computer name is going to be whatever value was entered into text box 1, right? So that's, remember, that was the name of my element when I was creating the form in Visual Studio. Okay, so PowerShell assigns a variable to that. So it'll be $textbox1, right? $textbox1, and then I want the text out of it. Okay, so $textbox1 dot text, and we'll do a count of just one ping, right? So that's my output, and then I want to put the results of that in text box 2. Right? So now you might be thinking, oh, why didn't you just cast it right there to start with? Well, I need to do a little bit with it. So I usually like to save whatever output I'm going to put in the final text box or whatever the final output is in a variable, and then I can kind of clean it up as I need it. Right? So we'll come in here, and the other one was text box 2. All right, so that was the name of that output box. So remember, that was the one I set for doing multi-line. So we'll do dollar text box 2 dot text equals dollar output, and like we did in the previous video, remember what goes in text box has to be string objects, so I'll make sure that the output is cast as string if I wanted to do that. So, and then down here, I'm going to take the comment off of my button, click. So what was the button called? The button 1. So we'll do dollar button 1 dot add click, and then we'll put the name of our function, which for me was ping. I remember I declared the function as ping right there. And that will then activate that button. So we'll go ahead, save here, bring back up our PowerShell, launch the script, put in a value, hit go, and we can see our output. Now our output is probably a bit too big for the for the text box here. I picked a weird font size, didn't I? All right, so maybe we'll see if we could adjust that a little bit. So for instance here, you could see in the XAML, like for instance, text box 2, if we kind of just look at this whole line here, we could see all the things that were in here. So notice like font size 16. Well, I could just neck that down potentially, maybe change it to 14. You could see the width and height of the element if I wanted that. So the width, I could make it a little wider. Maybe we'll go 550, all right, and save. All right, and let's go try that one more time. So it did make it a little wider. Let's put in localhost, go, and the output's still crunched. All right. So yeah, so we could keep, again, that's kind of the fun part of GUI sometimes is a bit of fine tuning this. So maybe we'll come in, change the font down to 12, make it smaller, put the width out maybe to 600. All right, and we'll give it one more shot here just to see if we're cooking. Localhost, go, and all right. So that looks not fantastic, but better. Um, it's still not showing perfectly, but again, we do have our output in here. So that's all I wanted to get into with this video. Again, I wanted to keep it short. So this is the second method, as I mentioned here, using, in this case, WPF, okay, using Windows Presentation Foundation. Okay, so in the link in the description, I will have the starter template here. Right, so again, just remember you take your code out of Visual Studio and just paste it in right at line 5, as I showed earlier. And that will be the start of putting together a graphical tool. So really, there's nothing real secret about this code. So you use that with Visual Studio to draw out your form, and you're ready to go. Right? So that's the second technique that I know about for creating a GUI around a PowerShell script using free tools, free resources. So again, if you like this, please consider liking and subscribing. If you have any additional ideas or things like that, feel free to throw a comment in there. Greatly appreciated. And we'll see you in the next video. So have a good one, everyone.